Greetings gamers, Tim Kirk here again, and I haven't acquired any recent new gaming books. I've picked up a supplement or two, but nothing mind-boggling or mind-blowing that I wanted to discuss. So I decided to go back into my shelves and see what I could find that might be interesting to talk about. Now, first and foremost, these are obscure games. Obscure games are, by definition, something that are not widespread or well known. That doesn't mean you haven't heard of them. It just means that in general, if I were to tell somebody about them on the street who I know games, they'd go, "What game is that? I've never heard of it." To begin with, I have reached back far into the closet and picked up one of my favorites, and that's what it's coming first. So bear with me. I'm going to blather on about it. I may go this entire video just talking about this one game. So be patient. Notably, it is a game of Providence. And as you can see by the covers, they kind of look very much like they have a heaven and hell theme, or a hell with an angel and hell with a devil on it. But that's not really the case. They're actually fantasy, alternate world fantasy, you know, as in it does not seem to resemble the Middle Ages of our Earth at all. Alternate world fantasy superhero game. Yes, it does all of that. Whether it does it well is kind of questionable. It's got a fantastic setting, one of the more unique settings out there. The rule system, however, leaves a lot to be desired. It's a rather complex iteration of D10 dice pool system. You roll a number of D10s equal to your stat plus your skill plus other things such as supporting skills, and you then subtract the opposing die pool, and you have to have 2 D10 left over. Have to. If you have more than 2 D10 left over, you can trade off the extra dice to get a bonus to your roll, or you can roll all of them and take the highest 2. As I said, it's got a lot of complexity to it. It's got a lot of grinding to a halt in actual play elements. It's not a bad idea. It just really needs somebody to come in at the end and streamline it significantly, probably until it looks more like a classic D10 dice pool system or a D6 dice pool system. Either the version found in the old D6 Star Wars, or something like what you would find in White Wolf's World of Darkness systems. It needed a lot of narrowing its focus down. Specifically, even though it presents this wonderful setting, they originally intended this rule set to be used across multiple game lines that never appeared. The problem with that is there are skills and abilities that have a lot of complexity that are in excess of what you actually need for this setting. And so they probably shouldn't have been in this particular iteration of the rule book, even if you were planning on doing more books for the rules later. Now, the setting is the big thing, and in fact, I highly recommend picking it up if you can find it in an old bookshop or online. This is the world book, and it is pretty much the entire world that you need to know to run the game. You don't actually need the rule book necessarily. It's got a few interesting tidbits in there, but nothing you can't live without. There are several other rule books as well. One on magic specifically, two on the ecology, several books that cover various NPC organizations that add some crunch to them, such as the book on this group called the Kestrels, which are martial artists, and so on. Now, the neat thing about the game is that the world is fairly fully realized. It's been thought through to a fairly decent extent. It's got a history to it, it's got some weight, but the basic premise, and probably the reason the covers look like you're visiting hell, is that they are prison metaphors, fundamentally. Because eons ago, this race fought this creature called the Elethorian Avatar and could not stop it. Since they couldn't stop it, they cast it into another dimension or another world or something. It's not real clear exactly how their portals work, but they used these portals to send it elsewhere. Years later, they had a war with each other, a war over their caste system, because the caste determined who got to do what kind of power you had over the society, and so on. And some of the lower echelons of that did not like that at all. So there was a war, which they ultimately lost. The people who wanted to get rid of the caste system, at least as I understand it, lost. And so rather than kill off a chunk of their race, they exiled them to this internal world. And that's the whole thing. It's another world or another dimension, but it's on the inside of a planet, which does not, of course, operate like what we expect a real physical inside of a planet to operate like. But it's fantasy, so you kind of have to give it a little bit of a nod, wink, wink. Okay, we accept this for the premise of the game. Now, these exiles were put in small prison camps, thousands of them in small prison camps inside this imprisoned world. The environment of this world changed in part due to the Elithorian avatar making it more livable. Animals, plants, everything sort of spawned from its existence and its power in that area. So there's an alien world, and there's these prisoners who eventually, thousands of years later, break out of the prison camps. And so now they're free to live their lives however they want. And what they do is they kind of have reestablished the caste system they fought against. Not entirely sensical, but that is often how history works. Now, it's very interesting. There's lots of factions, lots of powers. There's still some prison camps, and they didn't talk with each other. So there are places that are lost entirely to the actual current civilization, out in the wilderness somewhere between these huge, lush jungles of alien creatures and plants and everything. The sun in the center is actually a magical ball of energy, which they call weird in the setting. Weird is, there are different kinds of people who can manipulate magic. This weird star dims for night and brightens for day, among other things. It's kind of interesting. You can't actually fly up to it, despite the fact that the caste system is tied to whether you have wings and are capable of flying. In fact, the lowest on the totem pole are non-flyers, while the highest are flyers with good wings, with things in between. So there's tensions from that. There's tensions from the fact that some of the free cities that are no longer prisons have allied with a prison city in order to try and find a way out, because the world is falling apart. Not quickly. They probably have centuries, but they have to look for a solution, because the portals that let them in were supposed to continue to send supplies and food, among other things, but the portals collapsed, and nobody knows why. There's supposed to be a secret to the setting that was never revealed. I have pestered the original game author on it, and he can't recall, which is a shame, because I'd really like to know the secret. Personally, I had several theories, but he said those were definitely not it, so we'll let it go. But you have this world with non-humans. They're winged, their skin colors are alien, their biologies are different to support wings, of course. And there are different versions of this race, sub-kindreds. There are versions that are feathered winged and ones that are reptilian, leathery winged. There's gargoyles under the leather wing. That's the sub-race name. There's a race called dragons. Then under the winged race, there's the feathered winged race. There's a dozen or so different subspecies of them, like swans and eagles and hawks, and they're different. Hawks, for example, have claws. They have different skin colors and different skin markings. Some of them are being born without wings, as I said, but they're being born with glider membranes or with nothing. And that creates even more sub-races as these groups intermix. And it creates a very diverse sort of humanity, where humanity means these winged people. Now, it is a superhero fantasy game. Part of it is they exist in a low metal fantasy world. There's no metal to really mine for the most part, so most of it is scavenged from whatever they had before. There might be a little out there in the world, but not a lot, so they're relying on wood and plant and crystal and other things. They've also discovered out in the wilderness there are other peoples that may have been members of their race at one point that are insect-like or plant symbiotes. So it creates a rather interesting, complex levels of politics and racial pressure to play in. And then you add superpowers. Maybe because they live in a world where the sun is a magical star, or maybe because they're adapting to a world that doesn't really deal with the magic they use because it's helping to speed up the world falling apart. But some people develop superpowers. These superpowers are called shard powers, and they are magical in nature, but they do not affect the magical tapestry of the landscape the way spellcasting does. And they are, typical things like control of light, control of earth, turn your body to crystal or metal, and the like. Now, they don't quite go as far as traditional superhero games and let you do everything with the power system. In fact, they pretty much have no mental powers as a rule, although the Book of Weird, which is a supplement, adds some mental powers as, if you really want them. Their original argument was because players don't like mental powers being used on their character, which is somewhat true. I've noticed that people don't like being mind controlled, but there's a whole plethora of mental powers that do not necessarily affect another character's mind directly. You can read minds, you can see the future, you can see things distant from you with clairvoyance or extrasensory perception. You can have telekinesis that move things. And so while I'm glad they created these rules, I think they probably should have thought it out a little in more depth. And it does look like I'm running this video to the full length for this obscure game. Providence is probably one of the best fantasy settings that you've never heard about. There are some others that I really enjoy, like Skyrealms of Jarun, Calisfanta, and then some that I've heard of but never played with, like Tecumel. I mean, I've kind of touched upon it and played it a little bit, but it didn't really seem like it was a good setting for adventuring. And this has plenty to do. Plenty for the player characters to do, plenty for them to interact with, from exploring the environment, because there's wide swatches of just wilderness between their cities, to being a superhero. I mean, you can literally dress up in a costume and fight crime in one of their cities. It has a whole organization dedicated to this called the People Knights. You can look for a way out of the world. You can deal with the politics. It's got so much in it, and it was fundamentally blamed by a not great system and probably the time period it came out in. Gaming had kind of fallen off the radar, if I recall correctly. Third edition was on the horizon but not out yet, so it did not have the revitalization of Dungeons & Dragons D20 to kind of empower it into people's consciousnesses. And of course it wasn't a D20 system anyway. But it is a fantastic setting, well worth looking into if you're interested in mixing fantasy and superheroes, and it not being, just throwing superpowers on top of vanilla fantasy characters. I suggest going and taking a look. All the web pages for it are pretty much dead, so you can't get a lot of the information other than, my video or using something like archive.org or the Wayback Machine, or looking for other reviews. I really enjoyed these books. I showed them to a friend. He still loves it as a game setting, so it's not like it doesn't have some fans out there. Some of them created by me, but it's well worth taking a look and seeing if you like it or interested into it. The worst thing is you can get a book to put on your shelf that's a nice read that is not getting love somewhere else in some used bin or game store somewhere.